Snow fell in thick, relentless sheets across Michigan's Upper Peninsula, turning the world into something ancient and unforgiving. The kind of snow that didn't just cover the ground, it erased it. Pines stood like silent witnesses, their branches weighted down with white bending, but never breaking. The forest knew how to endure. It had done this 1,000 times before. Inside a small cedar cabin set back from the service road, Evelyn Hartford woke to darkness. Not the gentle dark of evening, but the heavy, suffocating dark of 3 in the morning when the mind does its cruelest work. Her eyes opened to the ceiling beams above her bed, rough-hewn wood that smelled like resin and old smoke. Her breath came fast, too fast, and her heart hammered against her ribs like it was trying to escape. The dream again. Always the same dream. A warehouse in Detroit. Concrete floors slick with rain that had leaked through the broken roof. The smell of rust and motor oil. A child's voice, high and terrified, calling for help. Eve running weapon drawn, clearing corners the way she'd been trained. Her partner shouting coordinates through the radio static. The door at the end of the hall padlocked from the outside. She'd kicked it open. Too late. Always too late. Eve closed her eyes and forced herself to breathe. In through the nose count to 4. Hold. Out through the mouth count to 6. The therapist's instructions. Doctor. Brennan had told her the nightmares would fade with time, that the brain needed to process trauma like the body needed to heal a wound. 6 months of mandatory leave. 6 months of forced rest in a cabin that belonged to her late father, a man she'd barely known, but whose silence she'd apparently inherited. A warm weight shifted beside her bed. Titan. The German shepherd lifted his massive head, amber eyes catching what little moonlight filtered through the curtains. His ears were forward alert but not alarmed, just checking, making sure she was all right. 5 years old, 90 pounds of muscle and instinct, with a sable coat that looked black in dim light, and a scar along his right shoulder from a training accident that had almost ended his career before it started. He'd been her partner for 3 years. FBI and certified K9, specialized in search and rescue with cross-training in threat detection. The kind of dog that could find a missing hiker in a blizzard or identify an explosive device hidden in a crowded terminal. The kind of dog that didn't bark without reason and didn't trust without cause. Right now, he was watching her with the patience of something that had seen her wake like this 100 times. Eve reached down and rested her hand on his head. Warm, solid, real. "I'm okay," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was talking to the dog or herself. Titan's tail thumped once against the floor. A small sound in the quiet cabin, but it was enough. Enough to pull her back from the edge of the dream, back into the present moment, where she was safe and no one was screaming for help she couldn't give. She sat up slowly, swinging her legs over the side of the bed. The floor was cold even through her socks. The cabin had heat, but it was the kind of old baseboard system that worked hardest in the rooms you weren't using. She grabbed the fleece pullover from the chair beside her bed and pulled it on over her thermal shirt. Her reflection caught in the window glass, athletic build gone slightly, too thin, shoulder-length, dark brown hair that needed cutting, blue-gray eyes that looked tired even after 8 hours of sleep. 30 years old, FBI, a special agent on forced medical leave. Living alone in the woods because the alternative was sitting in her Detroit apartment, listening to sirens and wondering if her team was handling a scene she should be on. She checked her phone out of habit. No messages, no calls. The FBI didn't need her right now, and that was the point. Rest, recover, come back when you're ready, if you come back at all. She pushed the thought away and focused on the routine. Routines were good. Dr. Brennan had said that too. Structure helps the mind find footing when everything else feels uncertain. Coffee first. The kitchen was small but functional, with a propane stove that hissed when she turned the burner on and a percolator that had probably been brewing coffee since the 70s. She filled it with water from the tap and measured out grounds from the canister on the counter. The smell alone was a comfort, rich, earthy, familiar. While the coffee worked, she checked Titan's water bowl and refilled it from the pitcher she kept on the counter. His food bowl was still half full from last night. He ate when he was hungry, never more than he needed. Disciplined even in appetite. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows in their frames. The weather report yesterday had called for a blizzard, 8 to 12 inches of fresh snow on top of the 2 feet already on the ground, wind gusts up to 40 miles per hour, visibility near zero by nightfall. The kind of storm that closed roads and left people stranded if they weren't careful. Eve didn't mind. Stranded meant alone, and alone meant no one asking questions she didn't want to answer. She poured herself a mug of coffee and stood by the window, looking out at the pale morning light just beginning to filter through the trees. The world was blue-gray and white clean in a way that almost hurt to look at. beautiful and brutal at the same time. Titan patted over and sat beside her, his shoulder brushing her leg. He was watching the window too, though she suspected he was seeing things she couldn't. His nose twitched slightly, tracking scents carried on the wind. Deer, probably. Maybe a fox. The forest was full of life, even when it looked empty. A knock at the door broke the silence. Titan's ears snapped forward. A low rumble started in his chest, not quite a growl, but a warning. Someone's here. Someone we don't know. Eve set her coffee down and crossed the room in 3 strides. Her service weapon was in a lockbox in her bedroom, unloaded per protocol. She wasn't on duty. She wasn't supposed to need it. But her hands still itched for the weight of it as she approached the door. She looked through the small window set into the wood. A man stood on her porch, broad-shouldered and lean, wearing a heavy canvas jacket and a knit cap pulled low against the cold. His face was weathered lines around his eyes that spoke of too much sun and not enough sleep. A short beard graying at the edges in the kind of stillness in his posture that came from years of standing watch. Garrett Sullivan. Her neighbor, though, that word didn't mean much out here, where cabins were separated by acres of forest and the nearest town was a 20-minute drive in good weather. She'd met him twice since moving in. Once when he'd helped her split firewood she didn't know how to handle, and once at the general store in town where he'd nodded at her and kept walking like conversation was something other people did. Ex-military, she'd guessed. The bearing gave it away. The way he moved, economical and precise. The way he didn't fill silence with words. She opened the door. Cold air rushed in, sharp enough to sting her face. Garrett stood with his hands in his pockets, a cord of firewood stacked on the flatbed of a rusted pickup truck parked behind him. "Morning," he said. His voice was rough, like he didn't use it often. "Brought the wood you ordered. Storm's coming in hard tonight. Figured you'd want it stacked before then." Eve had almost forgotten. She called the local supply company a week ago, and they'd said someone would deliver when they could. She hadn't expected Garrett to be the one doing it. "Thanks," she said. "I can help unload." "No need. Just point me where you want it." She gestured to the covered area beside the cabin where a half-empty woodpile sat. "There's fine." Garrett nodded and turned without another word. Titan watched him through the open door, ears still forward, but the rumble in his chest gone. Assessing. Deciding. Eve stepped out outside onto the porch, pulling her jacket tighter against the wind. She watched Garrett work, lifting logs from the truck bed and stacking them with the kind of efficiency that came from doing the same task 1,000 times. No wasted motion, no hurry. "You didn't have to do this yourself," she said after a moment. Garrett glanced at her, then back at the wood. "Company's short-staffed. Everyone's getting ready for the storm. I had time. You do this full-time firewood delivery. Part-time, park ranger the rest of the year. Off-season now." That explained the truck, the outdoor gear, the way he moved through the snow like it was nothing. Eve watched him stack another row of logs, the cold biting at her cheeks. "You live nearby?" she asked. 2 miles east, off the main trail." He paused, straightening to look at her. "You're FBI, right?" Eve tensed slightly. "How'd you know?" "Saw your vehicle registration when you checked in at the ranger station. Federal plates." He didn't say it like an accusation, just a fact. "You up here on a case?" "No, leave." Garrett nodded slowly, like he understood more than she'd said. "Good place for it. Quiet." He finished stacking the last of the wood and brushed bark dust from his gloves. The truck bed was empty now. The pile beside her cabin doubled in size. Enough to last through a hard winter if she needed it. "What do I owe you?" Eve asked. "Already paid. Company invoice." "For the delivery too," Garrett shrugged. "Consider it neighbor hospitality." He climbed into his truck without waiting for a response. The engine turned over with a cough, and he backed down the narrow drive with practiced ease. Eve watched until the truck disappeared into the trees, swallowed by the falling snow. Titan stepped out onto the porch beside her, his breath fogging in the cold air. He sniffed once in the direction Garrett had gone, then looked up at Eve as if to say, "He's all right, not a threat." "Yeah," Eve murmured. "I think so too." The morning stretched into afternoon. Eve tried to read a thriller she'd picked up in town, something about a detective hunting a serial killer, but the words blurred together and her mind kept wandering. She put the book down and did what Dr. Brennan had told her not to do. She opened her laptop and checked her work email. 43 unread messages. Most of them automated reports or inter-department memos that didn't require a response. 3 from her old partner, Agent Marcus Delacroix, updating her on cases they'd worked together. He was careful not to make it sound like he needed her input, but she could read between the lines. The Detroit field office was stretched thin. Budget cuts and personnel reassignments meant everyone was carrying double the caseload. She closed the laptop before she could type a response. Not your problem right now. You're on leave. Let them handle it. But the guilt sat in her chest anyway, heavy and familiar. By 3 in the afternoon, the snow was falling harder. The weather report had been right. Visibility was dropping fast, and the wind had picked up enough to make the cabin creak in its joints. Eve stood by the window again, watching the world turn white. Titan was restless. He paced from the door to the window and back again, ears swiveling to catch sounds she couldn't hear. After the 5th lap, he stopped in front of her and whined softly. Not distress, not fear, just a request. He needed to move. So did she. All right, Eve said. Short walk, service road only. We're not going deep. Titan's tail wagged once, a quick, efficient motion that said finally. Eve pulled on her winter gear insulated boots, heavy parka gloves, a knit cap that covered her ears. She clipped a tactical LED headlamp to the cap's brim, though it was still light enough to see. Barely. She also grabbed her go bag, a small pack she kept stocked out of habit of folding, shovel thermal blanket, first aid kit whistle, 50 feet of paracord, and a satellite messenger with GPS. Overkill for a short walk, maybe. But she'd learned a long time ago that preparation wasn't paranoia. It was survival. Titan waited by the door, tail wagging faster now. He knew what the pack meant. Adventure, purpose. The thing he'd been bred and trained for. Eve clipped a lead to his collar more for her benefit than his. Titan didn't need a leash to stay close, but the rules were the rules, and she followed rules even when no one was watching. She opened the door and the wind hit her like a physical thing, cold enough to steal breath, sharp enough to make her eyes water. Titan bounded out into the snow without hesitation, his thick coat shedding flakes as fast as they landed. They walked. The service road was a narrow strip of packed snow winding through the forest, wide enough for a single vehicle and marked by reflective posts every 50 yards. It wasn't plowed often, maybe once a week if the county had budget for it, but it was navigable on foot. Eve knew the route. She'd walked it a dozen times since moving in, 2 miles out, 2 miles back. Enough to clear her head and tire Titan out. The snow fell in soft, thick curtains, muffling sound, until the only thing she could hear was her own breathing and the crunch of her boots. Titan ranged ahead, nose to the ground, tracking scents she couldn't begin to identify. Every so often, he'd stop and look back at her, making sure she was still there. Good boy. Always checking in. They walked for 20 minutes before Titan stopped. Not a casual stop. A full freeze body, going rigid, ears snapping forward like radar dishes locking onto a signal. His head turned slowly to the left towards a section of forest where the trees grew closer together and the snow had drifted into deep, uneven mounds. Eve stopped too. What is it? Titan didn't answer. He just stared, nose working the air in short, rapid sniffs. His tail lifted slightly, not wagging. Alert, focused. She followed his gaze, but saw nothing. Just trees and snow and the gray-white blur of the storm. No movement, no sound. Titan heel. He didn't move. That was unusual. Titan was trained to respond to commands immediately, no hesitation. But right now he was locked onto something, every line of his body tense with purpose. Eve's pulse kicked up a notch. She trusted Titan's instincts more than her own. If he thought something was wrong, something was wrong. She scanned the tree line again, slower this time, looking for shapes that didn't belong. Movement against the static backdrop of falling snow. Her hand drifted to her hip, reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. Force of habit. Useless habit. Titan took a step forward. Then another. Not toward the road. Toward the trees. Titan, wait. He stopped, but only just. His body was vibrating now, a low whine building in his throat. Not fear. Urgency. Eve unclipped his lead. Fine, she said quietly. The command unlocked something in him. Titan surged forward, plowing through the snow with powerful strides, his nose down, tracking whatever scent had caught his attention. Eve followed her boots, sinking deep with every step. The snow was past her knees here, untouched and heavy. Titan stopped 15 yards into the trees at the base of a large drift that had piled up against a fallen log. He began digging, fast, frantic, his front paws tearing through the snow and throwing it behind him in white plumes. Eve's stomach clenched. She'd seen this before. Search and rescue training, the way a dog behaves when it finds something. Someone. She dropped to her knees beside Titan and pulled the folding shovel from her pack. Her hands were shaking, not from cold, from adrenaline, as she unfolded the blade and began scooping snow away in controlled, efficient motions. Dig carefully. Don't hit what's underneath. Don't cause more harm. 3 scoops. 4. 5. Her shovel struck something solid. Not wood, not stone, fabric. Eve's breath caught. She set the shovel aside and used her gloved hands to brush away the remaining snow. Working faster now, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. A jacket, dark blue insulated, caked with ice. A shoulder, an arm, a person, buried under the snow. "Oh God," Eve whispered. She cleared more snow, revealing a head of face. Young, female, teenage, maybe 16 or 17. Pale skin, blue-tinged lips, lashes crusted with frost. A strip of duct tape covered her mouth, partially peeled away at one corner. Eve pressed two fingers to the girl's neck, searching for a pulse. There, faint, thready, but there, alive. "Tighten, good boy, good boy." The dog backed off slightly, his job done, and watched as Eve worked. She peeled the tape from the girl's mouth as gently as she could, revealing raw, chapped skin underneath. The girl's eyes fluttered open, unfocused, dilated, struggling to see. "Hey," Eve said, her voice steady despite the panic clawing at her insides. "Hey, I've got you. You're safe now. Can you hear me?" The girl's lips moved, but no sound came out. Her whole body was shaking violent tremors that spoke of deep, dangerous cold. Hypothermia. Stage 2, maybe stage 3. Eve stripped off her own jacket and wrapped it around the girl's shoulders, then pulled the thermal blanket from her pack and layered it on top. She needed to get the girl's core temperature up, but she had to do it slowly. Warming too fast could send her into shock. "What's your name?" Eve asked, rubbing the girl's arms through the layers. Friction, gentle warmth. "Can you tell me your name?" The girl's eyes focused slightly, locking onto Eve's face. Her mouth opened, and this time sound came out. Barely a whisper, cracked and raw. "Hannah." "Okay, Hannah, I'm Eve. I'm FBI. You're going to be okay. I need you to stay with me, all right? Stay awake." Hannah's head rolled to the side, eyes sliding shut again. "Hannah, look at me." The girl's eyes opened halfway, glazed but aware. "How long have you been out here?" Eve asked. Hannah's lips trembled. I, I don't, it's okay. Don't worry about that. I'm going to get you help. But I need to know, did someone do this to you? Did someone bury you here?" Hannah's eyes filled with tears that froze on her lashes before they could fall. She nodded just barely. "Who?" Eve asked, her voice gentle but urgent. "Who did this?" Hannah's mouth moved. Eve leaned closer, straining to hear over the wind. "Captain Drake," Hannah whispered. "He's coming." The words landed like a punch to Eve's gut. Captain Drake. A name, a rank, law enforcement. Before Eve could ask more, Hannah's hand shot out and grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. Her eyes were wide now, focused with the kind of clarity that only terror can bring. 11 more, Hannah gasped. "Warehouse. Frozen Lake. 48 hours. They ship us out." Her grip loosened and her eyes rolled back. She went limp in Eve's arms. Hannah, stay with me." Eve checked her pulse again. Still there, but weaker. She needed medical help now. Not in 10 minutes. Well, Eve pulled the satellite messenger from her pack and activated the emergency beacon. The device would send her GPS coordinates to the nearest search and rescue dispatch, along with a distress code that meant immediate life-threatening emergency. Response time in this weather would be 30 minutes minimum, maybe longer. Too long. She pulled out her phone. No signal. The storm had wiped out the cell towers, or she was too deep in the trees. It didn't matter. The beacon was her only option. Titan stood beside her ears, pinned back, eyes on the tree line. He let out a low, rumbling growl that made the hair on the back of Eve's neck stand up. She looked where he was looking. 200 yards away, barely visible through the falling snow, a shape stood between the trees. Human, tall, motionless, watching. Eve's hand instinctively reached for her hip again. Still no weapon. Stupid. So stupid. The figure didn't move, didn't call out, just stood there silent and still like a shadow cast by something that wasn't there. Titan's growl deepened, his lips pulling back to show teeth. "Easy," Eve murmured, though she wasn't sure if she was talking to the dog or herself. She stared at the figure, trying to make out details. Gender build anything, but the snow was too thick, the distance too great. For 3 long seconds, neither of them moved. Then the figure turned slowly, deliberately, and walked away. Not running, not hurrying, just walking as if it had all the time in the world. And then it was gone, swallowed by the storm. Eve's heart was hammering now, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. Every instinct screamed at her to grab Hannah and run, but she forced herself to stay calm. Think. Assess. Whoever that was, they knew Hannah was here. They'd probably known all along. The burial had been deliberate, calculated, And now someone had just watched Eve find her, which meant they were either confident Eve couldn't do anything about it, or they wanted her to find Hannah. Neither option was good. The distant sound of a snowmobile engine cut through the wind. Then another, coming closer. Search and rescue. Had to be. The beacon signal had gone through. Titan barked once sharp and commanding. Not a warning, a signal. Reinforcements. Eve held Hannah close, keeping the thermal blanket wrapped tight, and waited. The snowmobiles came into view, three of them headlights cutting through the storm like knives. They stopped 20 yards out, engines idling, and two figures in heavy winter gear climbed off and approached on foot. One of them was Garrett Sullivan. He took one look at Eve, at the girl in her arms, and his expression shifted from concern to something harder. Something that understood exactly what he was seeing. "How bad?" he asked, kneeling in the snow beside them. "Hypothermia stage 2 or 3. Pulse is weak. She's been out here at least a few hours, maybe more." Eve's voice was steady, clinical, FBI mode. She said someone buried her, duct tape on her mouth. This wasn't an accident. Garrett's jaw tightened. He nodded to the second figure, a paramedic in a county rescue jacket, who immediately moved in with a medical kit. The paramedic checked Hannah's vitals, moving fast but methodical. "We need to get her to the hospital. Now." Yes, they transferred Hannah onto a rescue sled and attached to one of the snowmobiles, wrapping her in more blankets and securing her with straps. The whole process took less than 3 minutes. Garrett looked at Eve. "You coming?" "Yeah." She scooped Titan up, all 90 pounds of him, and lifted him onto the second snowmobile. He didn't protest, just settled into position like he'd done this before. Maybe he had. Military working dogs trained for everything. Eve climbed on behind him, and Garrett took the controls. The engine roared to life, and they shot forward through the snow, following the paramedic's sled. The ride was brutal. Wind tore at her face, snow blinding her even through squinted eyes. She held onto Titan with one hand and Garrus's jacket with the other, trusting him to navigate terrain she couldn't see. 20 minutes later, they burst out of the forest onto a cleared road where an ambulance waited, lights flashing red and blue against the white landscape. Paramedics swarmed Hannah, transferring her from the sled to a gurney and into the back of the ambulance. Eve caught a glimpse of her face, still pale, still unconscious, before the doors slammed shut and the ambulance pulled away, siren wailing. Garrett cut the snowmobile engine. The sudden silence was deafening. Eve slid off the seat, her legs shaking from adrenaline and cold. Titan jumped down beside her, shaking snow from his coat. "She said a name," Eve said quietly, looking at Garrett. "Captain Drake. Said he was coming." Garrett's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition. "You know him?" Eve asked. "County Sheriff's Department. Captain Vincent Drake. 28 years on the force. Decorated. Respected." Garrett paused. "Also Hannah Beckett's stepfather." Eve felt the ground shift beneath her. Stepfather. The girl had been buried alive, and the man she'd named was family. Law enforcement. Someone people trusted. "We need to get to that hospital," Eve said. "Now." Garrett nodded and started the engine. They rode in silence, following the ambulance's path through snow-covered roads that wound between dark trees. Eve's mind was racing, piecing together fragments. Hannah had said 11 more. Warehouse, frozen lake, 48 hours. This wasn't random. This was organized, systematic. And if Captain Drake was involved, that meant someone with authority, resources, and the ability to cover tracks. The hospital was a small, single-story building on the outskirts of town, the kind of rural facility that handled broken bones and flu season, but probably hadn't seen a major trauma in years. Lights blazed in every window, and the emergency entrance was a hive of activity as staff rushed to meet the incoming ambulance. Even Garrett pulled up behind it, parking the snowmobile in a loading zone. Eve jumped off before the engine fully stopped, Titan at her heels, and pushed through the doors into controlled chaos. Hannah was being wheeled down a hallway surrounded by nurses and a doctor in navy scrubs. The doctor was a woman, late 30s, dark-skinned hair pulled into a tight bun, moving with the calm efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Eve caught up to them. "I'm the one who found her. FBI." The doctor glanced at her, eyes sharp. "Dr. Amelia Whitmore. Hypothermia. Stage 2, maybe 3. She was conscious when I found her, but lost consciousness during transport." Dr. Whitmore nodded. "We'll warm her slowly. No heroics. You did good getting her here fast." They pushed through double doors into a trauma bay. Eve started to follow, but a nurse held up a hand. "Family only past this point." "I'm FBI," Eve said again, pulling her badge from her pocket. The nurse hesitated, then stepped aside. Eve watched as they transferred Hannah onto a hospital bed and began stripping away the wet, frozen layers of clothing. Her skin was mottled blue and white, her lips almost gray. They covered her with warmed blankets, started an IV with heated fluids, placed heated packs around her core. Dr. Whitmore worked with quick, precise movements, checking pupils, pulse blood pressure. She spoke in low tones to the nurse's medical jargon Eve only half understood. After 5 minutes, Dr. Whitmore straightened and looked at Eve. She's stable. Critical, but stable. We'll monitor her closely. The next few hours will tell us if there's permanent damage. Can I talk to her when she wakes up? If she wakes up in the next few hours, you can have 5 minutes. No more. She needs rest. Eve nodded. Thank you. She stepped out of the trauma bay into the hallway where Garrett was waiting, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. Titan sat beside him, perfectly still, eyes tracking every person who walked past. How is she? Garrett asked. Alive. That's all they can say right now. A deputy in a county sheriff's uniform approached from the other end of the hall, young, maybe mid-20s with short blonde hair and the kind of squared shoulders that came from wanting to prove herself. You're the one who found the girl, the deputy asked, looking at Eve. That's right. I need a statement. What happened where you found her, everything you remember. Eve gave her the basics: time, location, condition of the victim, the duct tape over her mouth. She left out Hannah's words. Not yet. Not until she knew who she could trust. The deputy took notes, her pen moving fast across a small notepad. And you said she was buried. Someone did this deliberately. That's what it looked like. Did you see anyone else in the area? Eve hesitated. The figure in the trees. Watching. Walking away. No, she said. Just the girl. It wasn't a lie exactly. She hadn't seen anyone clearly enough to identify. And until she knew more, she wasn't about to hand over information to local law enforcement. Not when Hannah had named a captain in their own department. The deputy nodded, still writing. Captain Drake will want to speak with you. Hannah's his stepdaughter. He's on his way now. Eve's stomach tightened, but she kept her expression neutral. Of course, Momo. The deputy finished her notes and walked away, leaving Eve and Garrett alone again. You didn't mention the name she gave you, Garrett said quietly. No. Smart. Eve looked at him. You think he's dirty? Garrett was silent for a long moment. I think, he said slowly, that a girl doesn't get buried alive in the woods by accident. And I think if she named her stepfather while she was half frozen and terrified, there's a reason. Eve pulled out her phone. Still no signal inside the hospital's thick walls. She needed to contact her field office report, this gets support. But the storm was still raging outside, and even if she could get a message through response time would be hours. She was on her own. A commotion near the entrance made her turn. A tall man in a sheriff's captain uniform strode through the doors, snow dusting his shoulders, silver hair perfectly combed despite the weather. He had the kind of face that belonged on campaign posters, strong jaw, clear eyes, the faint lines of someone who smiled often and meant it. Captain Vincent Drake. He looked every inch the decorated officer, the family man, the pillar of the community. He walked straight to the deputy, spoke to her in low tones, then turned and scanned the hallway. His eyes landed on Eve. He approached with a measured stride and hand extended. Agent Hartford, he said, his voice warm and steady. I can't thank you enough for finding Hannah. You saved her life. Eve shook his hand, firm grip, dry palm, no hesitation. Just doing what anyone would do, she said. Drake's smile was genuine, or at least it looked genuine. Not everyone would have gone out in a storm like this. Not everyone would have known what to do. He glanced down at Titan, who sat at Eve's side, watching Drake with unblinking amber eyes. That's your K9. Yes, sir, Titan. He's the one who found her. Drake nodded approvingly. Good dog. He didn't reach out to pet Titan. Smart. Most people made that mistake. Titan's lips pulled back slightly, just enough to show the edge of his teeth. Not a snarl, just a message. I see you. Drake either didn't notice or pretended not to. He looked back at Eve. I'd like to hear everything you can tell me about where you found her and what condition she was in. Every detail might help us to figure out what happened. Of course, Eve said, but I've already given a statement to your deputy. I know, I'd still like to hear it from you if you don't mind. Father's prerogative. His expression softened just enough. I've been searching for Hannah for 2 days. She ran away from home after an argument. Teenage stuff, you know how it is. I thought she'd gone to a friend's house, but when the storm hit, he trailed off, shaking his head. I've been out of my mind. Eve's instincts were screaming. Everything about his story sounded reasonable, plausible, the kind of thing that happened in small towns across America every day. But Hannah had said his name, had said he was coming. And Titan, who had never been wrong about a threat in 3 years of partnership, was growling low in his chest. Eve trusted her dog more than she trusted a decorated captain with a warm smile. "I'd be happy to give you a full report," Eve said carefully, "once Hannah is stable and can corroborate the details. Right now, I think Dr. Whitmore needs space to work." Drake's smile didn't waver, but something in his eyes shifted, just for a second, like a door closing behind glass. "Of course," he said. "Family first. I'll be in her room if you need me." He walked away down the hall toward the trauma bay. Eve watched him go, every muscle in her body tense. Garrett stepped closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "He's good." "Yeah," Eve said. "He is. Too good." Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, surprised to see a signal, weak but there. A single bar, unknown number. She answered. "Hartford." Silence on the other end, not dead air, breathing. Someone listening. Then a voice. Male. Calm. Almost pleasant. "Agent Hartford." Eve's blood turned to ice. "Who is this?" "You should have stayed on leave." The voice was smooth, unhurried. "Quiet cabin in the woods. No cases, no complications. Why couldn't you just rest?" "Who is this?" Eve repeated, her hand tightening on the phone. "You've seen too much, done too much. Winter buries secrets, Agent Hartford. It'll bury you too." The line went dead. Eve stared at the phone, her heart pounding. The call had lasted less than 20 seconds. Not long enough to trace, even if she'd had the equipment. Garrett was watching her. What was that? A threat? From who? I don't know. But she had a pretty good idea. She looked down the hall toward the trauma bay, where Captain Drake had just disappeared through the doors. A man who'd been searching for his missing stepdaughter. A man who'd arrived at the hospital within minutes of her being brought in. A man whose name had been the last thing Hannah said before losing consciousness. Titan pressed against her leg, a solid warm weight, grounding her, reminding her that she wasn't alone. Eve took a breath and made a decision. She wasn't on leave anymore. She was on a case, and whatever was buried under the snow of Michigan's Upper Peninsula, she was going to dig it up, even if it killed her. The hospital coffee tasted like burnt cardboard, but Eve drank it anyway. She needed the heat more than the caffeine needed something to do with her hands, while her mind worked through the pieces that didn't fit. Hannah Beckett, 16 years old, buried alive in the snow, duct tape over her mouth. Her stepfather, a decorated sheriff's captain, showing up at the hospital with a story about a runaway teenager and a family argument. And a voice on the phone telling Eve she'd seen too much. None of it added up to accident. All of it pointed to something deliberate. She stood in the hallway outside the trauma bay watching the doors. Garrett had gone to move his truck from the emergency zone, leaving Titan with her. The dog sat at her feet perfectly still, ears tracking every sound in the building. He hadn't relaxed since Captain Drake walked past them. That low growl had never fully stopped, just quieted to something Eve could feel more than hear. A nurse pushed through the trauma bay doors, nearly running into Eve. "Sorry," the woman muttered, hurrying past with an armful of medical supplies. Through the briefly opened doors, Eve caught a glimpse of Hannah on the hospital bed. Still unconscious? Still pale. But the monitors showed steady rhythms, and Dr. Whitmore was speaking calmly to another nurse. Good signs. Captain Drake sat in a chair beside the bed, his head bowed, hands clasped between his knees. The picture of a worried father. If Eve hadn't heard Hannah whisper his name, hadn't felt the warning in her gut, she might have believed it. The door swung closed again. Eve pulled out her phone and moved to a quieter corner of the hallway. The signal was still weak, flickering between one bar, and nothing but it was enough. She pulled up her secure messaging app, the one the FBI used for field communications, and typed quickly. To Agent Patricia Rousseau, FBI Detroit Field Office. Subject urgent. Possible human trafficking. Case message. Found juvenile female buried alive in snow near Copper Harbor, Vermont. Victim named law enforcement officer as perpetrator before losing consciousness. Request immediate support and guidance. Severe weather limiting communications. Will update when possible. She hit send and watched the message sit in the outbox, trying to push through the weak signal. 5 seconds. 10. 15. Finally, the status changed to delivered. Eve let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Patricia Rousseau was a 20-year veteran of the FBI and tough as iron and twice as sharp. If anyone could mobilize resources in the middle of a blizzard, it was her. But even Patricia couldn't change physics. Response time in this weather, from Detroit to the Upper Peninsula, would be 4 hours minimum. Probably longer. Eve was on her own until then. A hand touched her shoulder, and she spun, instincts flaring. Garrett stood there, palms raised. Easy, just me. Eve forced herself to breathe. Sorry, I'm a little on edge. You should be. Garrett glanced toward the trauma bay. Drake's still in there. Yeah. He say anything else to you? No, he's playing the concerned father, doing a good job of it too. Garrett's expression was unreadable. You know what you're walking into here? No, Eve admitted, but I'm going to find out. Alone. I called my field office. Help's coming, but not for a few hours. Garrett was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. All right, then you're going to need someone who knows the area, and someone who's been in situations like this before. Eve studied him. The weathered face, the calm eyes, the way he carried himself with that particular stillness that only came from military training. Navy SEAL, she guessed. Was 20 years. Retired 2 years ago. Why medical discharge, took shrapnel in Kandahar, nothing life-threatening but enough to end the career. He said it matter-of-factly like he was describing the weather. Came back to Michigan, tried to figure out what civilians do with their time. Still figuring. Eve understood that. The struggle to fit back into normal life after years of operating in extreme conditions. She'd only been FBI for 8 years, but it had already changed her in ways she couldn't undo. I'm not asking you to get involved in this, she said. You're not asking. I'm offering. Garrett met her eyes. I lost a teammate in Afghanistan, trafficking case. We found the compound too late. I don't forget that kind of thing. Eve nodded slowly. Okay, thank you. Don't thank me yet. If Hannah was telling the truth and Drake is involved, then we're not dealing with some small-time operation. This is organized, protected, and they're not going to let you walk away just because you have a badge. I know. The trauma bay doors opened again, and this time Dr. Whitmore stepped out. She looked tired but satisfied. She's stabilized. Core temperature is coming up. No signs of permanent damage so far, but we'll need to monitor her for the next 24 hours. Can I talk to her? Eve asked. She's still unconscious. Could be another hour, could be 6. Hypothermia recovery is unpredictable. Dr. Whitmore glanced back through the doors. Captain Drake wants to take her home as soon as she's cleared. I told him that's not happening tonight, but he's insistent. He can be as insistent as he wants, Eve said. She's not going anywhere until I've had a chance to interview her. Dr. Whitmore raised an eyebrow. This is official FBI business. It is now. Then I'll make sure the nursing staff knows. No one moves her without your clearance. The doctor paused, lowering her voice. Between us, something about this doesn't sit right. The tape residue around her mouth, the way she was buried, that's not a teenage runaway scenario. No, Eve said. It's not. Dr. Whitmore nodded and headed back into the trauma bay. Eve's phone buzzed. A message from Patricia Rousseau. Received your report. Mobilizing HRT, but weather is delaying departure. Earliest arrival 0600 hours. Do not engage suspects alone. Observe and document only. That's an order, Hartford. Respond to confirm. Eve typed back quickly. Confirmed. Will maintain observation status. It wasn't entirely a lie, she'd observe. Right up until the point where observing wasn't enough anymore. Another message came through, this one from the hospital's deputy who'd taken her statement earlier. Service road cameras near the location where you found Hannah Beckett. Check the footage. Files were manually deleted. Not weather damage. Someone wiped them on purpose. Eve's jaw tightened. She showed the message to Garrett. Covering tracks, he said. Professional job, too. Most people don't know how to do a clean wipe on security systems. Most people aren't law enforcement with access to county infrastructure. Drake, or someone working for him. Oh, Eve looked back toward the trauma bay. Hannah said 11 more. Warehouse near a frozen lake. If she's telling the truth, then we're not looking at one victim. We're looking at a network. Eve's mind was already moving through the logistics. A trafficking operation needed infrastructure. Safe houses, transportation, people on payrolls who wouldn't ask questions. And most importantly, it needed someone with authority to make investigations disappear. Someone like Captain Vincent Drake. Her phone buzzed again. Another message, this time from an unknown number. You're making a mistake, Agent Hartford. Walk away while you still can. Eve stared at the screen. 2 threats in less than an hour. Someone was watching her, tracking her communications, or close enough to know what she was doing. She showed the message to Garrett. They know I'm not backing off. Good, let them know. Garrett's expression was grim. Means they're worried. Worried people make mistakes. A commotion at the far end of the hall drew their attention. A man in a contractor's vest and cheap gray beanie was pushing a wheeled cart stacked with medical supply boxes. He looked out of place, too young, 2 nervous eyes that didn't quite meet anyone's. Titan's reaction was immediate and visceral. The dog surged to his feet, ears pinned forward, a growl rising from deep in his chest that Eve had only heard twice before. Once during a live shooter drill. Once when a suspect had pulled a concealed weapon during an arrest. This wasn't caution. This was threat assessment. Eve's hand instinctively went to her hip, reaching for a service weapon that wasn't there. She'd left it locked in her cabin following protocol for medical leave. The mistake burned in her chest. The contractor pushed the cart closer, heading toward the trauma bay. A nurse intercepted him. "Can I help you?" "Late delivery," the man said, his voice light but strained. "Medical supplies. Sorry, storm delayed everything." The nurse frowned. "We didn't request a late-night delivery." "It's on the schedule. I can show you the invoice." Something about his body language was wrong. The way he stood too rigid, the way his eyes kept darting toward the trauma bay doors where Hannah lay recovering, the way his right hand stayed inside his vest pocket gripping something. Titan took 3 deliberate steps forward, placing himself between Eve and the contractor. The growl deepened into something primal, and his lips pulled back to show teeth in a display Eve had trained him never to make unless the threat was real and immediate. Eve trusted her dog more than her own instincts. "Open the boxes," she said, her voice carrying the weight of federal authority, even though she technically had no jurisdiction here. The contractor's smile cracked like thin ice. "I don't think open them now." The deputy who'd taken Eve's statement earlier appeared from around the corner, hand moving toward her sidearm. "Is there a problem here?" "This man is delivering supplies the hospital didn't request," Eve said calmly, keeping her eyes locked on the contractor. "And my K9 is indicating a chemical threat." The deputy looked at Titan, who was now vibrating with barely contained aggression, every muscle coiled and ready. She'd seen enough police dogs to know what that posture meant. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step away from the cart and keep your hands where I can see them." The contractor hesitated, just for a second, but that second told Eve everything she needed to know. He bolted. The cart went crashing to the floor as he shoved it toward the deputy and sprinted for the exit. Boxes spilled open, medical supplies scattering across the tile in a chaos of white gauze and plastic packaging. Except they weren't all medical supplies. Tucked beneath the sterile packages was a sealed plastic pouch, unmarked and vacuum sealed. And beside it, a hard case designed for syringes, the kind that held pre-filled doses. But these weren't for IV lines or vaccinations. "Stop!" the deputy shouted, drawing her weapon as the contractor crashed through the exit doors. Garrett was moving before Eve could speak, his SEAL training erasing 20 years in an instant. He sprinted after this contractor with the kind of explosive speed that didn't match his weathered appearance, disappearing into the storm beyond the glass doors. Eve knelt beside the spilled cart, pulling an evidence glove from her pocket habit, made her carry a few even on forced leave, and carefully opened the plastic pouch with the edge of her pen. Inside were 3 syringes pre-filled with clear liquid that caught the fluorescent light. No pharmaceutical labels. No dosage markings, no identifying information of any kind. "Don't touch those," Dr. Whitmore said sharply, appearing at Eve's side. She'd heard the commotion and come running. She pulled on her own gloves and examined the syringes without picking them up, her experienced eyes narrowing. "This isn't medication, at least not anything we stock here." "What is it?" "I'd need to run tests to be certain, but based on the viscosity and the way it's packaged, Doctor." Whitmore's jaw tightened, her professional calm cracking slightly. "Could be potassium chloride, high concentration. Injected directly into a recovering hypothermia patient, it would stop the heart in minutes. Make it look like the victim's body just couldn't recover from the cold exposure." The words landed like a physical blow. They weren't here to help Hannah. They were here to finish what the snow had started, to silence the one witness who could name Captain Vincent Drake. The exit doors banged open and Garrett strode back in alone. Snow dusted his shoulders and his breathing was slightly elevated, but his expression was carved from stone. Lost him in the storm. He had a vehicle waiting exactly where he needed it. 50 yards out, engine running, gone in 10 seconds. This wasn't improvisation. This was planned. The deputy was already on her radio, calling for backup, requesting a county-wide alert for a suspect matching the contractor's description. But Eve knew it was already too late. Whoever sent that man had planned for failure. He was already miles away, and any evidence he might have carried was gone with him. Captain Drake emerged from the trauma bay, his face a carefully constructed mask of concern. "What's going on out here? I heard shouting." The deputy explained quickly, the contractor, the cart, the syringes that weren't medicine. Drake's expression shifted through what looked like genuine shock, then anger, then grim determination. Each emotion perfectly timed, perfectly calibrated. Someone tried to hurt Hannah here in a hospital. Someone tried to kill her. Eve corrected, watching his face for any micro-expression that didn't fit the script. And they knew exactly where she was, exactly when to strike, and exactly how to make it look like natural causes. Drake's eyes locked onto hers, and for just a moment, less than a heartbeat, the warm, concerned father act slipped. Eve saw something else beneath it, something cold and calculating and utterly without remorse. Then it was gone, replaced by righteous fury that would have convinced anyone who wasn't looking for the cracks. "I want this entire building locked down," Drake said, his voice carrying command authority that made even the FBI deputy straighten instinctively. "No one in or out without clearance. Deputy, call the sheriff. I want every available unit on this. I don't care about the storm." "Sir, the storm." "I don't care about the storm. Someone just tried to murder my daughter in a hospital bed. I want them found. Now." The deputy nodded and hurried away to make calls, and Drake turned back to Eve. His expression softened into something that looked like gratitude but felt wrong in ways Eve couldn't articulate. "Agent Hartford, I owe you again. If you hadn't been here, if your dog hadn't alerted—" He shook his head, the gesture of a father contemplating a nightmare too terrible to voice. "I can't even think about it." "Just doing my job," Eve said, keeping her voice neutral and her eyes steady on his face. "Well, you've gone above and beyond tonight." Drake glanced down at Titan, who was still standing at a rigid attention, still watching Drake with unwavering focus, and that low, continuous growl that said everything words couldn't. "That's one hell of a K9 you've got." "He's never wrong," Eve said quietly, and let the weight of that statement hang in the air between them. Drake's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm going to make sure Hannah has round-the-clock security. Armed guards. No one gets near her without my personal clearance. You have my word on that." "I'll be staying as well," Eve said, "until she wakes up and I can get her statement. Federal witness protection protocols." "Of course, whatever you need." Drake nodded to her, then to Garrett, and headed back into the trauma bay with the measured stride of a man who had everything under control. As soon as the doors closed behind him, Garrett moved closer to Eve, his voice barely above a whisper. "You catch what he said?" "Personal clearance," Eve murmured back. "Meaning he controls who sees Hannah, which means we can't trust anyone wearing a county uniform," Garrett finished. "He's putting his own people on security. Anyone tries to get to Hannah, they'll have to go through guards who report directly to the man who tried to have her killed." Eve felt the trap closing around them like the snow had closed around Hannah. Every move Drake made looked reasonable on the surface. Every decision sounded like it came from a concerned father and a dedicated law enforcement professional. But underneath, he was building walls, controlling access, making sure that when Hannah woke up, if Hannah woke up, there would be no safe way to get her statement without Drake knowing every word. Her phone buzzed with a message from Patricia Rousseau. "Update HRT delayed further. Weather grounding helicopters. Ground transport only option. New ETA 900 hours. Sending you backup agent Marcus Delacroix is in Marquette on another case. He can be to you in 90 minutes. Hold position until he arrives. Do not engage alone. Acknowledge." Eve checked the time. 2,100 hours. Marcus wouldn't arrive until 22:30 at the earliest, assuming the roads were even passable. 3.5 hours until HRT, 90 minutes until her partner arrived with support, and Hannah Beckett lying unconscious in a hospital room, guarded by men who might be working for the man who'd buried her alive in the snow. She looked at Garrett, then down at Titan, who had finally relaxed slightly, but whose eyes remained locked on the trauma bay doors like a sentinel watching for demons. "We need to get that GPS tracker," Eve said quietly. "The one Hannah said was sewn into her jacket lining. If it really has locations for 11 other girls, we need that data before Drake figures out she had it." "Evidence locker." "Should be hospital protocol for patient belongings." They moved with purpose, Eve flashing her badge at the nurse's station and requesting access to Hannah Beckett's personal effects. The night shift clerk was tired and overworked and didn't ask difficult questions, just pointed them toward the secure storage room with a wave of her hand. The jacket was there, still damp with melting snow, still torn at the shoulder, where Titan had grabbed it during the rescue that felt like days ago, but had been only hours. The fabric was cheap polyester designed to look like better material, the kind of coat a teenage girl might buy at a discount store with money saved from a part-time job. Eve ran her fingers along the hem, feeling for the anomaly Hannah had described. There, a small hard bump beneath the lining, no bigger than a button. She pulled out her pocket knife and carefully cut the stitching with hands that had steadied now that she had a concrete task. The GPS tracker fell into her palm. Military-grade hardware, not civilian equipment. The kind of device that cost serious money and required technical knowledge to program. The kind of thing a teenage runaway couldn't possibly afford or know how to use, unless someone had given it to her. Eve powered it on and the small screen lit up with data that made her stomach clench. 12 locations, 11 marked active in red, 1 marked extracted in yellow. Hannah's count had been off by 1, or they'd grabbed another girl in the time since she'd escaped. Eve pulled out her phone and photographed every screen, every coordinate, uploading them to her secure FBI server, with hands that wanted to shake, but didn't because she wouldn't let them. Garrett leaned over her shoulder, studying the map. Most of these are clustered around water, Lake Superior, smaller inland lakes. One location stands out. He pointed to coordinates that resolved into an address when Eve cross-referenced them. A warehouse facility on a narrow peninsula jutting into Lake Superior, surrounded by forest on 3 sides and frozen water on the 4th. 30 miles from where they stood. Isolated. Defensible. Perfect for hiding something you didn't want found. That has to be the holding facility, Eve said. Or it was. If Drake knows Hannah escaped, if he knows she had this tracker, he'll move them. Hannah said 48 hours before they shipped the girls out. If she escaped 2 days ago, we're out of time, Garrett finished. They're moving them tonight, maybe right now. Eve's phone rang. Marcus Delacroix. She answered. Marcus? Eve. Got Patricia's message. Roads are hell. GPS says 90 minutes, but I'm thinking closer to 2 hours. What's your situation? Eve filled him in quickly. The hospital infiltration attempt, Drake's suspicious behavior, the GPS tracker showing 11 active locations, and 1 warehouse that screamed primary facility. Marcus swore softly. You need to wait for HRT. Do not approach that location alone. That's not a request, that's an order from Patricia through me. If we wait, those girls are gone, loaded into trucks and shipped across state lines. You know how this works. And if you go in without backup, you're dead. You know how that works too. Eve looked at Garrett, who was watching her with that calm, steady expression that said he'd follow whatever decision she made and make it work even if the odds were terrible. I won't be alone, Eve said. Eve, I'm sending you the coordinates now. You and HRT, head straight there. I'm going to do reconnaissance only. Eyes on target, nothing more. I'll assess the situation and wait for your arrival before any action. It was a careful dance around an outright lie, and they both knew it. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Patricia is going to have both our asses for this. Probably, Sikaye. All right, I'm burning every traffic law in Michigan to get to you faster. But Eve promised me you won't do anything stupid. I promise I'll do the smartest thing possible with the information I have. That's not a promise. It's the best you're going to get. She ended the call before he could argue further and looked at Garrett. You ready, man? Trucks loaded with gear. Body armor, thermal scope, night vision. Not military grade, but better than going in naked. He paused. You sure about this? Eve thought about Hannah whispering 11 more girls through hypothermic delirium. Thought about the 4 bodies Dr. Whitmore had mentioned finding under the ice during the forensic sweep. Thought about Captain Drake sitting beside his stepdaughter's hospital bed with the face of a concerned father and the heart of something that could bury children in the snow. I'm sure, she said. The ambulance bay at the hospital looked like a war zone. 12 girls wrapped in thermal blankets, their faces pale and hollow eyes that had seen too much. Paramedics moved between them with quiet efficiency, checking vitals, starting IVs, speaking in soft voices that promised safety even when safety was a word that had lost all meaning. Eve stood back watching. Her hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was fading, leaving behind exhaustion that settled into her bones like cold. Titan pressed against her leg, his weight grounding her, reminding her she was still here, still standing. Marcus approached with 2 steaming cups of coffee. He handed one to Eve without a word. She took it, grateful for the warmth, even though she couldn't taste anything past the copper tang of fear that still coated her tongue. State police are setting up a perimeter around the warehouse, Marcus said. HRT is doing a full sweep. Looks like most of the guards scattered when we showed up, but they left behind enough evidence to bury a small city. He paused. And they found bodies under the ice, just like you said. Eve closed her eyes. She'd hoped she was wrong about that. Hoped the shape Titan had found was something else, anything else. How many? She asked. 4 so far. Medical examiner thinks they've been there for months, maybe longer, preserved by the cold. Marcus's voice was carefully neutral, the way agents talked when the alternative was screaming. This wasn't some new operation, Eve. This was established, organized, running for years. Years. How many girls had moved through that warehouse? How many had fought back and ended up beneath the ice? Where's Drake? Eve asked. Good question. Sheriff's Department says he left the hospital an hour ago. Said he was coordinating the search for the contractor who tried to kill Hannah. No one's seen him since. He ran. Looks that way. We've got an APB out roadblocks on every major highway. Storm's still bad enough that he can't have gotten far. Marcus studied her. You think he knew that we were coming? He knew something, probably has people watching the warehouse. The second we breached, someone made a call. Then he's had an hour head start. Could be across state lines by now. Not in this weather, and not without resources. Eve thought about the calm in Drake's eyes, the way he'd played the concerned father so perfectly. He's got a bolt hole, somewhere local, somewhere he's prepared for exactly this scenario. We'll find him. Will we? Eve looked at Marcus. How many people in the sheriff's department knew about this? How many were on his payroll? We can't trust local law enforcement. We can't even be sure about state police. FBI's clean. Are we? Because one of the girls just told a paramedic that a woman with an FBI jacket brought her to the warehouse. Eve watched Marcus's expression shift. We've got a leak, Marcus. Maybe multiple leaks. And until we know who, we can't trust anyone. Marcus swore quietly. Patricia needs to hear this. Patricia's in Detroit coordinating from there. By the time she vets everyone and sets up a clean chain of custody, Drake could be in Canada. So what do you want to do? Eve looked at the girls being loaded into ambulances. 12 survivors, 4 bodies under the ice. Hannah Beckett fighting hypothermia in a hospital bed. And somewhere in the storm, a decorated captain who'd built an empire on stolen lives. I want to finish this, Eve said. The FBI had set up a temporary command center in the hospital's conference room. Maps covered every surface, laptop screens glowed with data streams, and agents moved with the controlled urgency of people who knew they were racing a clock that had already run out. Patricia Rousseau appeared on the video call screen, her face tight with exhaustion and fury. She was in her Detroit office, surrounded by her own team, coordinating what was rapidly becoming the largest human trafficking bust in Michigan history. Agent Hartford, Patricia said, her voice carrying the weight of 20 years and zero tolerance for excuses. You disobeyed a direct order. Yes, ma'am. You engaged hostile forces without backup. Yes, ma'am. You extracted 12 victims from an active crime scene in the middle of a blizzard with nothing but a retired SEAL and a K-9. Yes, ma'am. Patricia was silent for a long moment. Then her expression shifted just slightly. Good work. Now don't ever do it again. Understood. Status on the victims. Marcus stepped into frame. All 12 are being treated for hypothermia, malnutrition, and various injuries consistent with prolonged captivity. The youngest is 14. Oldest is 22. We've got counselors en route from Detroit, but the storm's delaying them. IDs. Working on it. Most of them are too traumatized to talk. The ones who have talked say they were grabbed from bus stations, truck stops, rest areas. Classic vulnerability targeting. Runaways, foster kids, anyone without a strong support system to report them missing. Patricia's jaw tightened. And Captain Drake? In the wind, Eve said, but I don't think he's gone far. Explain. Eve pulled up a map on one of the laptops marking locations with quick clicks. The warehouse was 30 miles from the hospital. Hannah Beckett was buried 12 miles from my cabin, which is 15 miles from the hospital in the opposite direction. That puts Drake's operation in a triangle with the hospital roughly at the center. She highlighted an area. He's operating in a comfort zone, somewhere he knows, somewhere he controls. He won't leave that unless he's forced to. He's forced now. But he doesn't think he is, not yet. Eve zoomed in on the map. Drake spent 28 years building influence in this county. He knows every road, every back trail, every place to hide. He's got resources, stashed, probably safe houses, definitely allies. He's not running, he's repositioning. For what? To finish what he started. 12 girls got away. That's 12 potential witnesses who can put him away for life. He can't let that stand. Patricia leaned closer to her camera. You think he's going to come back for them? I think he's going to try. Marcus shook his head. That would be suicide. We've got federal agents crawling over this entire area. State police on every road. He'd have to be insane. Or desperate, Eve said, and desperate men do desperate things. A knock on the conference room door interrupted them. Doctor. Amelia Whitmore entered, still in her scrubs, looking like she'd aged 5 years in the last 3 hours. Hannah's awake, she said, and she's asking for you, Agent Hartford. Eve found Hannah in a private room, guarded by 2 FBI agents Marcus had personally vetted. The girl looked smaller than Eve remembered, fragile against the white hospital sheets, but her eyes were clear and focused. You came back, Hannah said, her voice rough but steady. I told you I would. Eve pulled a chair close to the bed. Titan settled at her feet and Hannah's hand immediately reached down to touch his head. The dog didn't move, that just sat there solid and warm and real. Did you find them? Hannah asked. The other girls. We found 12. They're safe, being treated in this hospital. Tears spilled down Hannah's cheeks. I didn't know if anyone would believe me about my dad, about what he does. I believe you. And we're going to make sure he can't hurt anyone else. Hannah's hand tightened in Titan's fur. He's not my real dad. My real dad died when I was 8. Drake married my mom 2 years later. He was nice at first, brought me presents, took me camping. Then mom got sick. Cancer. She died last year. I'm sorry. After she was gone, he changed. Or maybe he just stopped pretending. Hannah's voice was flat now, reciting facts because emotions were too dangerous. He started bringing girls to the house. At night, said they were runaways he was helping. But I heard them crying, heard him on the phone talking about money, about buyers. Did you tell anyone? I tried, went to a teacher. She said I was grieving, making things up because I was angry about losing my mom. Went to my school counselor. She called Drake. He picked me up, took me home, and locked me in my room for 3 days. Said if I ever told anyone again, I'd end up like the girls who didn't behave. Eve felt rage building in her chest, hot and righteous. How did you end up buried in the snow? I found evidence, photos on his computer, financial records. I copied everything to a USB drive and was going to mail it to the FBI. But he caught me, took the drive, said I'd forced his hand. Hannah's eyes went distant. He drove me to the woods, made me walk into the snow, taped my mouth, told me winter would take care of his problem. Then he buried me and left. But you had the GPS tracker. I sewed it into my jacket lining the week before. One of the girls at the warehouse told me about it. She had one too, said it was the only way anyone would find us. She gave me hers before they... Hannah stopped, unable to finish. Before they... what? Before they took her away. The ones who fight back or try to escape, they don't come back. Drake calls them examples. Hannah looked at Eve directly. She's under the ice, isn't she? The girl who gave me the tracker. Eve didn't lie. Probably. We found 4 bodies. We'll identify them and notify families. Hannah nodded slowly. Her name was Cassidy. She was 17, from Ohio. She liked poetry. I'll make sure that's in the report. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Hannah said, he's not going to stop. Even if you arrest him, even if you put him in prison, he'll find a way. He always finds a way. Not this time. How can you be sure, Boy? Because I'm not going to give him the chance. A commotion in the hallway made Eve turn. Raised voices, the crackle of radios, running footsteps. One of the FBI guards opened the door. Agent Hartford, we've got a situation. Eve was on her feet immediately. What kind of situation? Sheriff's Department just showed up. 10 officers. They're demanding access to the victims. Say it's their jurisdiction and we're interfering with a local investigation. Led by who? Sergeant Thomas Vickers. He was Drake's second in command. Eve's blood ran cold. Don't let them in. Nobody gets past this door without my explicit authorization. They've got a judge's order. I don't care if they have a note from God. Those girls are federal witnesses in protective custody. Local law enforcement has no jurisdiction here. The guard nodded and moved back to his post. Eve turned to Hannah. Is Vickers involved? Yes, he's the one who drove the trucks, moved the girls between locations. He's almost worse than Drake because he doesn't even pretend to care. It's just business to him. Eve pulled out her phone and called Marcus. We've got Sheriff's Department trying to access the victims, led by Sergeant Vickers. Hannah confirms he's part of the operation. On my way, Eve looked at the 2 guards. No one comes through that door. I don't care what papers they have. You shoot first and sort out jurisdictional issues later. Clear. Clear. She left Titan with a Hannah the dog would die before letting anyone hurt the girl and headed for the main corridor. The scene was controlled chaos. 10 sheriff's deputies in full uniform, all armed, all positioned in a way that looked official but felt like a siege. Leading them was Sergeant Vickers, a man in his mid-40s with the kind of face that looked friendly until you saw his eyes. Marcus was already there, standing between the deputies and the hallway that led to the victims. Behind him, 6 FBI agents, weapons not drawn, but hands positioned for quick access. Sergeant Vickers, Marcus said, his voice calm and professional. I understand you have concerns, but these victims are in federal protective custody. You'll need to coordinate with our field office if you want access. We don't need to coordinate anything, Vickers said. His voice was smooth, reasonable. These are crimes that occurred in our county. We have jurisdiction, and we have a court order from Judge Morrison authorizing us to take custody of all victims for processing. Judge Morrison, Eve said, stepping forward, the same judge who's been on Captain Drake's Christmas card list for 15 years. Vickers' eyes narrowed. That's a serious accusation, Agent Hartford. And human trafficking is a serious crime, Sergeant. So is obstruction of justice. So is conspiracy. Eve held his gaze. We have 12 survivors who are going to testify that your department, your officers were directly involved in their abductions and captivity. We have financial records showing payoffs to 14 county officials. We have bodies under the ice. So you can take your court order and, Agent Hartford, Marcus said quietly. A warning. Eve forced herself to breathe. You're not taking these girls, period. Then you're in contempt of a court order. Then I'm in contempt. Arrest me if you want, but those girls don't move until I have independent verification that every single person involved in their transport has been vetted and cleared by federal authorities. Vickers smiled, and it was the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. You're making this very difficult. Good. The standoff held for a long moment. 10 deputies against 6 FBI agents. The math wasn't favorable, but Eve knew Marcus wouldn't back down. Neither would she. Then Vickers' radio crackled, a voice urgent. Sergeant, we've got a problem at the warehouse. You need to see this. Vickers lifted the radio without breaking eye contact with Eve. What kind of problem? Sir, the evidence. Someone's been here. Multiple someones. They've destroyed everything. Computers smashed, files burned, the whole operation's been wiped. Eve's stomach dropped. Vickers' smile widened. Sounds like you've got bigger problems than jurisdiction, Agent Hartford. Without evidence, you don't have a case. Just a bunch of traumatized girls telling stories about a decorated police captain. He keyed his radio. Copy that. I'm en route. He looked back at Eve. Guess you'll have to let them go eventually. Can't hold witnesses forever without charges. And without evidence, there won't be any charges. He turned and walked away, his deputies following. As soon as they were gone, Marcus rounded on Eve. The warehouse, he had a contingency plan. Of course he did. Eve was already moving, pulling out her phone. He knew the second we breached that warehouse, he had a limited window to destroy evidence. While we were busy with the rescue, he had people inside cleaning up. HRT secured the scene. An hour after we left, that's 60 minutes to destroy hard drives, burn files, remove anything that could definitively tie him to the operation. Eve called Patricia. We've got a problem. Patricia's response was immediate and profane. How bad? Bad enough that Sergeant Vickers just walked in here with a smile. Someone destroyed evidence at the warehouse. Tell me we have backups. Tell me we have something. Eve thought about the GPS tracker still in the evidence locker, about Hannah's testimony, about the 12 girls who could identify faces and locations. We have witness testimony, she said. Witness testimony from traumatized teenagers against a decorated police captain with 28 years of service in a department full of character witnesses. Eve, you know how this plays out. Defense tears them apart on the stand, talks about false memories, coaching attention-seeking. Without physical evidence, we have the GPS tracker, which proves nothing without the server data it was transmitting to. And let me guess, those servers were in the warehouse. Eve closed her eyes. Yes, then we're in trouble. There has to be something. Financial records, communication logs, something they couldn't destroy in 60 minutes. I'm pulling every forensic accountant we have. We'll trace the money. But Eve, that takes time, weeks, maybe months. And in the meantime, Drake is in the wind, and his people are destroying whatever we might have missed. Eve leaned against the wall, exhaustion and frustration warring in her chest. They'd rescued 12 girls. They'd exposed a trafficking network. They'd done everything right, and it still might not be enough. There's one more thing, Eve said slowly. Hannah said Drake kept evidence, photos, financial records. She copied them to a USB drive before he caught her. Where's the drive? Drake took it when he buried her. Patricia was quiet for a moment. So the one piece of evidence that could tie this whole thing together is in the possession of the man we're trying to arrest. Yes. Perfect. Just perfect. Eve ended the call and found Marcus waiting. We need to find Drake, she said. Not just to arrest him, to get that USB drive. He could have destroyed it by now. He could have. But men like Drake, they're careful. They keep insurance. Leverage. That drive has information that could implicate everyone in his network, including the people above him. He won't destroy it. He'll keep it close. Then we need to figure out where close is. Eve pulled up the map again, staring at the triangle of locations. The warehouse, the burial site, the hospital. Somewhere in that area, Drake had a safe place. Somewhere he felt secure. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You've taken everything from me. Now I'll take everything from you." Eve's hands tightened on the phone. "He's watching us. Right now, he knows we're at the hospital." "Hospital's locked down. He can't get in." "Can't he?" "He's got 10 deputies who just walked right up to our perimeter. Who says they all left?" Marcus's expression shifted. "You think Vickers left people behind?" "I think Vickers is playing a game. Keep us focused on the jurisdictional fight while someone slips through the back door." They moved fast, splitting up to check security points. Eve took the east wing where the victims were being treated. Marcus took the west where Hannah's room was located. Eve's radio crackled. One of the FBI guards. "Agent at Hartford, we've got a nurse trying to access the victims ward. Says she's here to check vitals, but she's not on the staff roster." "Detain her, I'm coming." Eve ran Titan, materializing at her side from wherever he'd been. They reached the victims ward to find a woman in scrubs, hands raised, face calm. "There's been a mistake," the woman said. "I'm with the night shift. Just started last week." Eve looked at the guard. "She on the hospital personnel list?" The guard checked his tablet. "No, ma'am." "Then she's not a nurse." Eve stepped closer. "Who sent you?" The woman's calm cracked slightly. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You're going to jail for obstruction of justice, possibly accessory to human trafficking. Or you can tell me who sent you and maybe we work out a deal." The woman's shoulders sagged. "He said you'd all be gone by now. Said the sheriff's department would clear the scene." "Who said that?" "Sergeant Vickers. He gave me $2,000 to come in here and disconnect the IV on one of the girls. Make it look like a medical error." Eve felt sick. "Which girl?" "I don't know. He just said room 4. Room 4. Eve pulled up the patient roster. The girl in room 4 was 16 years old from Wisconsin, one of the ones who'd been conscious enough to give a statement. One of the witnesses who could put faces to naming. "Take her into custody," Eve told the guard, "and double security on room 4. She was pulling out her phone to call Marcus when the lights went out. Complete darkness. Emergency backup generators should have kicked in immediately, but they didn't. Someone had cut the power. Not just to the wing, to the entire hospital." Eve's radio crackled with overlapping voices. Marcus shouting orders, guards calling in positions, and underneath it all, the sound of gunfire. "This is it," Eve said into her radio. "He's making his move. All agents defensive positions around the victims. No one gets through." She pulled her night vision goggles down, still carrying them from the warehouse raid, and the world shifted to green. She could see FBI agents moving to secure positions. Could see patients in their rooms confused and frightened. Could see nurses huddled at their stations. And she could see at the far end of the hallway 3 figures in tactical gear moving with military precision toward the victim's ward. Not sheriff's deputies. These men were professionals. Mercenaries, probably. Hired by Drake to finish what his corrupt deputies couldn't. Eve keyed her radio. 3 hostiles, east corridor, full tactical gear. Engaging. She didn't wait for backup. She moved down the hallway, Titan silent at her side, weapon. Up, breathing controlled. The 3 men were focused on the victim's ward, not watching their 6. Mistake. Eve took the first one with 2 shots to the back. He went down hard, his weapon clattering across the floor. The other 2 spun, bringing their rifles up. Eve dove into a patient room as gunfire tore through the hallway. Titan followed low and fast. She came up firing from the doorway, forcing them to take cover. One ducked into a supply closet. The other flattened against the wall. Then Marcus was there, coming from the opposite direction, catching them in a crossfire. The fight was over in seconds. 2 men down, 1 wounded, all 3 disarmed. But Eve knew this was just the opening move. "He's here," she said. "Drake. He has to be close coordinating this." Marcus nodded. "I'll secure these 3. You go find him." Eve moved through the darkened hospital like a ghost Titan at her side, following an instinct she couldn't name. Drake was here. She could feel it, could sense him the way Titans sense threats. She found him in the hospital chapel. A small room on the ground floor, non-denominational, with simple wooden pews and a stained glass window that looked black in the darkness. Captain Vincent Drake sat in the front pew, hands clasped, head bowed. Praying or planning, Eve couldn't tell. She stepped inside, weapon raised. "It's over, Drake." He didn't move, didn't turn, just spoke to the darkness in front of him. "Is it because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've lost? Evidence destroyed. Witnesses traumatized. My lawyers will tear apart anything they say. The judge will throw out the case. I'll retire quietly, move to Florida, and no one will ever prove a thing. We'll prove it. With what testimony from broken girls? GPS data from servers that don't exist anymore. You've got nothing, Agent Hartford. Nothing but theories and righteous anger. Eve moved closer, tightened, growling low beside her. I've got 12 survivors who are alive because I didn't give up. That's not nothing. No, Drake agreed. It's not. You did good work tonight. Saved lives. Should be proud. He finally turned to look at her and his face was calm, peaceful. But saving them doesn't mean you can prove I took them. The system doesn't work on feelings. It works on evidence, and the evidence is gone. Not all of it. Hannah told me about the USB drive, the one with your photos and financial records, the one you took from her before you buried her alive. Drake's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. If such a drive existed, and if I had it, what makes you think I'd keep it? I'd be stupid to hold on to something that could destroy me. You're not stupid, you're careful. That drive doesn't just have evidence against you. It has evidence against everyone in your network. Politicians, judges, other officers. It's your insurance policy. Your guarantee that if you go down, you take everyone with you. You'd never destroy that leverage. Drake smiled slowly. Smart woman. FBI trained you well. Where is it? Even if I told you, even if you found it, it wouldn't matter. The encryption key is in my head. Without it, the files are useless. And I'm not giving you that key. Then we'll break the encryption. Take months, maybe years. And in that time, my lawyers will have destroyed your case 6 different ways. You lose Agent Hartford. You did everything right and you still lose. That's how the world works. Eve felt something hot and bitter rising in her throat. Rage. Frustration. The same feeling she'd had in Detroit when she'd kicked down that warehouse door too late. But this time was different. This time she'd saved the people she could save. You're right, Eve said quietly. The system doesn't always work. Evidence gets destroyed. Witnesses get intimidated. Guilty men walk free. She lowered her weapon slightly. But here's the thing about systems, Drake. They're made of people, and people can choose. Choose what? To do the right thing. Even when it's hard. Even when it costs them. Drake laughed bitter and sharp. You think someone in my network is going to flip? Going to risk everything to testify against me? These people are survivors, Agent Hartford. They look out for themselves. Always have. Always will. Maybe. Or maybe one of them is tired. Tired of looking over their shoulder. Tired of sleeping with nightmares. Tired of being the kind of person who buries teenagers in the snow. You're naive if you believe that. I've been called worse. Eve's radio crackled. Marcus's voice. Eve, we've got a walk-in. Sergeant Vickers. Says he wants to make a deal. Drake's face went pale. No, he wouldn't. Wouldn't what betray you the same way you betrayed everyone else? Eve kept her weapon steady. You're under arrest, Captain Drake. For human trafficking, conspiracy, attempted murder, and about 40 other charges we'll add as we go. Stand up slowly and put your hands behind your head. Drake stood, but his hands didn't move. I could have killed you. In the woods. When I watched you find Hannah. I could have put a bullet in your head and ended this. Why didn't you? Because I didn't think you'd be a problem. FBI agent on medical leave, traumatized, broken. I thought you'd find Hannah, call it in, and let other people handle it. I thought you'd learned your lesson about being a hero. He shook his head. I was wrong. Yeah, Eve said, you were. She cuffed him herself, reading him his rights in the darkness of a chapel that smelled like old wood and broken promises. When she was done, Marcus arrived with 2 FBI agents who took Drake into custody. As they led him away, Drake looked back at Eve one more time. This isn't over. Yes, Eve said, it is. But she knew he was right. It would never truly be over. The sun was rising when Eve finally stepped outside the hospital. The storm had broken during the night, and the world was washed clean. White snow, blue sky, pale gold light that made everything look new. She was exhausted, bruised, running on coffee and adrenaline and the stubborn refusal to collapse until the job was finished. Titan sat beside her, his gray muzzle resting on her knee. He was tired too. She could see it in the way he moved slower than before, his joints stiff from the cold and the long night. But he'd done his job, saved lives. Been the kind of partner every agent hoped for and most never found. Marcus approached with 2 more cups of coffee. Vickers is singing like a bird. Gave us names, dates, financial records he kept as his own insurance policy. Turns out Drake wasn't the only one who liked leverage. How many people involved? 14 officers in the sheriff's department, 2 state police, 1 FBI agent, that woman the girls mentioned, plus assorted civilian contractors and political allies. The whole thing's going to take months to untangle. And Drake's USB drive, found it in a safe deposit box under a false name. We've got our best cryptography team working on the encryption, but Vickers gave us enough other evidence that we might not need it. Eve nodded slowly. The girls, all stable, all talking to counselors. It's going to be a long road, but they're alive. That's what matters. Hannah, asking for you actually, says she wants to thank you properly. Eve finished her coffee and stood her body protesting every movement. Titan rose beside her, stretching carefully. They found Hannah in her room, sitting up in bed, looking more alert than Eve had seen her. Dr. Whitmore was checking her vitals, satisfied with whatever she found. Agent Hartford, Hannah said, I wanted to tell you something. What's that? When I was buried in that snow, when I couldn't breathe and I couldn't move and I thought I was going to die, I prayed. I don't usually pray, but I did then. I asked God to send someone, anyone. And then I heard your dog digging. Eve felt her throat tighten. Titan's the real hero. No, you both are. You didn't have to help me. You were on leave. You could have called someone else and walked away. But you didn't. Hannah's eyes were clear and steady. You stayed. And because you stayed, 11 other girls get to go home. That's not luck. That's not coincidence. That's a miracle. Eve didn't know what to say to that. She'd never been comfortable with the word miracle. She believed in training, evidence, hard work. But looking at Hannah alive and safe and healing, she had to admit there was something else at work too. Something beyond tactics and procedure. Get some rest, Eve said finally. You've got a long road ahead. So do you, Hannah replied. But I think you're going to be okay now. I can see it in your eyes. They're different than when you found me. Less haunted. Eve realized the girl was right. For the first time in 6 months, the nightmare warehouse in Detroit felt distant. The child's voice calling for help had been replaced by 12 voices, thanking her for coming when it mattered. She'd lost one fight, but she'd won this one. And maybe that was enough to start healing. The FBI field office in Detroit held a briefing 3 weeks later. The conference room was packed with agents, prosecutors, victim advocates, and reporters from every major news outlet in Michigan. Patricia Rousseau stood at the podium looking like she'd aged and rejuvenated at the same time. The case had taken everything from everyone involved, but it had also reminded them why they'd signed up for this work in the first place. Today, I'm pleased to announce that we have secured convictions or plea agreements in 47 cases related to the Great Lakes Trafficking Network, Patricia said. Captain Vincent Drake has been sentenced to 14 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. Sergeant Thomas Vickers received 25 years in exchange for his testimony. 14 other law enforcement officers have been arrested and charged. The investigation is ongoing. She paused, looking directly at the cameras. I also want to acknowledge the work of Special Agent Evelyn Hartford, whose actions directly led to the rescue of 12 victims and the exposure of a network that had operated for over 8 years. Her courage and dedication represent the best of what the FBI stands for. Eve sat in the back of the room, uncomfortable with the attention. She'd written her reports, given her testimony, and done her job. The medals and commendations felt wrong somehow. Empty. The real victory was in the faces of the girls who testified in court, in the families who'd been reunited, in the knowledge that a monster had been stopped. After the briefing, Patricia pulled Eve aside. You're officially cleared for active duty, full reinstatement. You can return to your unit whenever you're ready. And if I'm not ready, Patricia studied her, then you take more time. No one's going to judge you for that. I want to come back, but I want to do something different. Different how? Eve thought about Hannah's words, about miracles and purpose, and the way small choices could save lives. I want to lead a task force, anti-trafficking specifically focused on the Great Lakes region. There are more networks out there, more people like Drake, and I want to stop them before they get as big as this one did. Patricia smiled slowly. I was hoping you'd say that. The budget's already approved. You'll have full authority to build your team, set your priorities, work across jurisdictions. It's yours if you want it. I want it. Good, because we've already got our first case, Wisconsin. 9 girls missing from a logging camp. Local sheriffs asking for FBI assistance. Eve felt something shift in her chest. Not the old fear and doubt. Something else. Certainty. Purpose. When do I start? Tomorrow too soon. Tomorrow's perfect. 6 months after that briefing, Eve stood in a snowy Wisconsin forest watching as FBI agents led 9 rescued girls out of a compound hidden deep in the woods. Her task force had tracked them for 3 weeks, built the case carefully, and executed the raid with precision. 0 casualties, 9 lives saved, 12 arrests. Not perfect, but good. Titan was grayer now, moving slower, spending more time resting than working. He'd been retired from active K-9 duty, but he still came with Eve on every case. Still sat in her truck, still watched her back, still grounded her when the nightmares tried to creep back in. Garrett Sullivan was there too. He joined the task force as a tactical consultant, bringing 20 years of SEAL experience to an organization that desperately needed people who understood how to operate in extreme conditions. He approached now, his breath fogging in the cold. 9 for 9. That's a good day. It's a start, Eve said. There are more out there. Then we'll find them. Eve looked at the girls being loaded into ambulances, at the agents securing evidence, at the frozen landscape that had almost claimed more victims. She thought about Hannah Beckett, now in college, studying criminal justice and talking about becoming a prosecutor. About the other 11 girls from that Michigan warehouse, each finding their own path to healing. About the 4 bodies they'd recovered from beneath the ice, finally identified and returned to their families. About Captain Drake spending the rest of his life in a federal supermax prison. About the system that had failed and the people who'd chosen to fix it anyway. Her phone buzzed, a text from Patricia. New case, Minnesota, 12 girls missing, local PD requesting our assistance. Briefing tomorrow 0800. Eve showed the message to Garrett. You ready? Always. She looked down at Titan, who was watching her with those steady amber eyes. The dog's tail wagged once. Slow but certain. Ready. Eve typed back a response. We'll be there. She slipped her phone into her pocket and stood in the snow watching the sunrise paint the forest gold and pink and orange. The colors of hope, of new beginnings, of second chances. The nightmares still came sometimes. The warehouse in Detroit still haunted her in the quiet moments. But now, when she woke gasping in the dark, she didn't just remember the child she'd lost. She remembered the 21 girls she'd saved. And she remembered that evil didn't get the final word. Not as long as there were people willing to stand against it, people willing to walk into the storm and dig through the snow and refuse to stop until the buried were found. That was the job. That was the mission. And with faith, a loyal dog, and a purpose worth fighting for, Eve Hartford had learned that miracles weren't just possible. They were inevitable. You just had to be willing to work for them. Somewhere in the distance, a helicopter's rotors beat against the morning air. More victims being airlifted to hospitals. More families about to get calls that their daughters were coming home. More lives pulled back from the edge. Eve closed her eyes and let herself feel it. The weight of exhaustion, the ache of old wounds, the quiet satisfaction of work that mattered. Then she opened her eyes, called Titan to her side, and walked toward the truck where Garrett was already loading gear. Because there was always another case, always another call, always another chance to make the choice that mattered most. To show up, to stay, to fight. The winter would come again, the snow would fall, the cold would test everyone who ventured into it. But Eve Hartford had learned something in that Michigan forest, kneeling beside a girl who should have died. Winter buries secrets, but spring always comes. And when it does, the truth rises to the surface. Always.